out in Utah. And it's graphic. It was very graphic. He was right there. He was relatively close. And my first thought, which ended up being correct, was, and I felt bad because, students are talking about it, and I thought he hasn't been shot. He's unfortunately dead, right? Because again, you saw what happened.
Unfortunately was online and saw the video before people turned off autoplay and exact same. I mean, it was just awful. Yeah, I mean,
and I wasn't anticipating that. You're not expecting a message. You're not expecting an SMS message to come in and be like, "Oh, I was thinking like maybe he's been hit in the shoulder. He's
right."
But it was what it was, and I do mean this quite honestly. It's a sad fact that he did in fact die from that gunshot to his neck, but he grows a growing line of individuals who have now died as a result of political violence in the United States, and specifically, let's be honest, gun violence. And right now, as of this morning, we know a little bit more than we did as we were kind of preparing and getting ready for the show. What we have known is that, for one thing, he was shot from a distance about 200 yards away with a bolt action rifle as the weapon of choice. And according at the time to the Wall Street Journal, but now having been confirmed by authorities, there were political messages on the bullets. And of course, we wait on some other details. But as of this morning, Friday the 12th, it appears to be Utahian Tyler Robinson, who was at least the alleged shooter at this moment and has been arrested. And that has been confirmed both by Governor Spencer Cox and obviously earlier this morning by President Trump. The alleged killer, Tyler, apparently confessed to his father, Matt, who owns a construction company. He apparently reportedly told his father that he'd rather kill himself than turn himself in, but he was convinced to speak with a local youth minister who was also part of the United States Marshal Service. Social media accounts linked to the Robinsons family show that he kind of fits the mold of kind of your traditional Republican-ish Utah family. He's a guy who was around weapons. He has images of him with some pretty fancy weapons, including an M2 Browning 50 caliber long-range machine gun. Tyler Robinson doesn't appear to have any criminal history at this juncture, according to state records who've been reviewed by routers, for example. He is a registered voter, has not been affiliated with a political party, although it does appear that his family is Republican, again, according to state voter records. And so, Justin, obviously, on the top line level, we have this absolutely tragic event, and it has hit home closely for, in my case, many of my students. That was a hard couple of days. It's been a hard couple of days for them. People who have been involved with TPUSA. I will be honest, I am actually the advisor for that here at Oklahoma Christian University. But there is another aspect of this, and that is what this means more broadly politically in the United States for growing political violence, what it may or may not mean for thinking about how we can or cannot control that. And we also have the aftermath of that, Justin, that I think we need to talk about. The issue has already been quickly politicized. And so on the one hand, we've had a small cadre of individuals who have long been upset by Kirk and have had less than kind things to say about his death. But then we also, on Capitol Hill just yesterday, during what was supposed to be a moment of silent prayer, there ended up being an exchange between House members, really starting when Taylor Greene said, basically silent prayer leads to silent outcomes, which then led Florida Republican Representative Luna to shout, "You caused this," to which then a Democrat responds, "Pass some gun laws," and the floor is lost at that moment. So we have these kinds of, there it is. Meanwhile, in Trump's speech about this, he argued that, quote, "the radical left," end quote, is directly responsible for the death of Kirk. Trump called Kirk, quote, "a martyr for truth and freedom." Katie Miller, the wife of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, posted on X, quote, "It's a real treat to see all these liberals condemn political violence now. You called us Hitler, you called us Nazis, you called us racists, You have blood on your hands, end quote. And we don't have to go very far. Laura Loomer, who I would like to think of as being a little more of an outside voice, but is clearly an inside voice in the Trump administration, said, quote, "The left are terrorists," and added that you could be next. We must shut these lunatic leftists down once and for all. The left is a national security threat, end quote. And others, we have had Republican Representative Derek Van Orden posting on X, quote, "The left and their policies are leading America into a civil war, and they want it. Just like the Democratic Party wanted our first civil war. The gloves are off," end quote. And he would go on to compare some of this to brown shirts, in his words, in a different one. Prominent conservative commentator Matt Walsh might have been the most inflammatory of these this morning. He had said, quote, "The entire right has to band together. Enough of this infighting bullshit. We are up against demonic forces from the pit of hell. They're killing us in our churches. They tried to kill our president. They killed Charlie, one of our greatest advocates. Put the personal squabbles aside. Now's not the time. This is existential, a fight for our own existence and the existence of our country," end quote. That's hot rhetoric. I mean, that is really, really hot rhetoric. And, you know, in the aftermath of the attempt on then candidate Donald Trump's life, there was a worry about a fracturing of American life. But Justin, I think this moment, I'm just going to start by saying, I think that this moment is more fraught than that moment was, for a variety of reasons, including that Trump is the president. In this case, it wasn't a near miss, and it was it actually, somebody was in fact killed. But this is a big deal. These are not just voices crying in the wilderness. These are mainstream voices talking about this, and this is the kind of the opposite of what one would hope would be happening in the aftermath of this kind of political violence, to bring the temperature down in a real way. So what do you think happens to the American political world in the aftermath of Kirk's tragic death? And what does his death, if anything, tell us about polarization, gun violence, and political violence in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, there has, I don't think, ever been a moment where I've been kind of as concerned about, you know, kind of the state of play in American politics. First off, I mean, nobody should get shot over politics. I mean, nobody should get shot, period. I mean, that's, you know, just
absolutely.
Nobody deserves that. And, regardless. And, I have been concerned for a while. I think we have sort of a kind of an ugly trifecta, at the moment of, inflammatory rhetoric, weird online spaces, which I think I have a suspicion is going to figure into this story eventually. And to be clear, I this is all very speculative at the moment. I was buying breakfast at a Casey's when they arrested the shooter, and so we don't know a whole lot at this point, and still don't. But I think the rhetoric, and then the guns. And I say this, I am a gun owner. That has occasionally come up on here, and so
yeah, I think we talked about that ourselves. I think we're actually the only two on the show who do.
I think it absolutely blew Jay's mind when I was talking to him one time that I was the one that owned guns. So I'm certainly not a sort of knee-jerk anti-gun person. But at the same time, I think you throw these things together and, you have, I think, unfortunately, kind of the ingredients for a really bad situation. And I think that is playing out. We have a lot of people who are armed, who are kind of feeding on particular rhetoric and who are, in spaces potentially that reinforce those ideas and conceivably egg people on. And so, again, without knowing much about the shooter, but I think you can couch some of this, not so much the political rhetoric, but I think there are a lot of commonalities with kind of the recent wave of political violence and school shooters. For example, those are not necessarily politically motivated, although at least some of them have been stewing in political, in strong political rhetoric, as well. But I think it's this combination, and sort of the concern that I have had for a long time as this kind of has been brewing, and I and others I think have been concerned about this for several years at this point, is that you're going to get these sort of lone wolf stochastic terrorist types. You don't need to mobilize a group. You don't need to build an organization. You can get one sensitive person, and again, we don't know much about the shooter, but there are going to be people out there who are more sensitive to being radicalized and more sensitive to taking action.
There's a whole set of literature on this. We don't need to get into that, but yeah, I mean, we study that as political scientists even.
We do, and I mean, this goes back, I mean, I kind of politics and the internet is one of my interests, and I mean, I remember seeing a paper 25 years ago about neo-Nazi discussion boards at the time, but we can imagine that lots of places would function in the same way. And I mean, the kind of basic finding then that I think is true now is that people that have certain inclinations in a mild way stumble into kind of echo chambers that are reinforced and get egged on and things.
And then today, because of the monetization of those platforms, right? So when even some of that early research was done, that was pre having kind of micro targeting abilities.
Well, this is just people doing it for fun. There's no money to be made. There's no, you can't.
Yeah, the most recent research that kind of feeds off of that then suggests that we continue to get fed what we react with the most, and so as a result, it's even easier today. Like I have a book on the shelf behind me right now, one of the first ones that defined the echo chamber, and it was talking about talk radio and what you're saying, kind of the nascent internet. But this is long before YouTube knew. Hey, look, your eyeballs were on this for precisely 27 seconds, and this other one you're there for 32 seconds, and now I know what to start feeding you in a different way.
Right, exactly. And there are then, apart from that, I mean, there are communities. I mean, we've seen this with school shooters. Like there are kind of, in the corners, but there are, groups of people that are obsessed with school shootings and things like that, that are, sharing manifestos and egging each other on and things. And so I don't know that he's been a participant in, anything like that, but we have, I think, this scenario where these circumstances where you have, unfortunately, this perfect storm of, kind of rhetoric and kind of those more social aspects of the internet, coming together with people who have easy access to guns. I mean, you don't need to. In this country, you don't need to start Al Qaeda to perpetrate political violence. You can, find ways to get radicalized, and you can take action relatively easily, and that's terrifying. I mean, the idea that we are going to have to be sort of on guard, constantly. But we've seen, just in the last 3 months, I mean, we've seen, Speaker of the House Hortman from Minnesota assassinated along with her husband and their dog. We had a guy a week or two ago killed a police officer, I believe, outside of the CDC, taking shots there, et cetera. And it feels like we are in a moment of escalation. And that is tremendously, tremendously concerning. Because again, it doesn't take much organization. It doesn't take much of any, it's very easy to go out and commit an act of violence.
And let's add to that a little bit, Justin, because I think part of what you're saying there actually rubs up against what I think was an intuitive response by many. I can't tell you how many people were telling me this had to be a hit job. This was a hire, this is some kind of pro. And I kept telling people, No,
No.
you don't understand how easy, right? So, I mean, it seems, I think in this case, kind of, and don't get me wrong, like I love a good action movie, but I think action movies and our media diet have jaded us to the idea that to kill someone with a weapon is going to take a ton of training. And even just a little bit we know about Tyler, this is obviously something that his family did. And that's not a criticism. I'm just saying that's something they did.
Right.
It doesn't take a lot of target practice to hit something 200 yards away with a bolt action rifle. No, you don't have to be a hit. You don't have to be a hitman to make that
Right.
happen. And I say that to say that I think that part of the problem is we have this as a country. There's this idea that, oh, that's harder to do because the actual tools are harder to use than that. And the answer is, well, no, they're not really.
I guess, and I have maybe a little mixed feelings about that. I broadly agree with you because I mean, certainly, kind of in, certainly in kind of lefty circles, there was this idea that, oh, he must be ex-military or a CIA plant or something.
I was
like
even
that.
hearing that in the right circles. I wasn't thinking about the left. That's interesting. So
yeah, I mean, that was going around too, and I won't dignify, with details, necessarily. I mean, it is, it's something that you would have to work at. It is, so I guess, kind of my initial response is that, that is the kind of thing, again, it's different from, say, a school shooter where so many of those, I mean, they bought a gun yesterday or stole a gun from their parents or whatever. And, close range, soft targets, what have you. This is something that I dare say a lot of gun owners have sort of a Dunning-Kruger about them where I don't think they could necessarily, take a shot like that. But especially out West where it's, you don't have to go to sniper school, you're taking shots like that, anyway. But it is somebody, I think, to the couple things that stood out. It's certainly somebody that strikes as having a fair amount of experience. I mean, one, to make a shot from that distance. And two, I think the other thing is to only shoot once. Like that is sort of I think somebody that doesn't have any experience would fire a bunch of shots, and to sort of have that patience. And that's something I used to hunt a little. And that was something that was, be ready for another shot, but don't immediately, wait and see what happens, and so, to have sort of that discipline. And I suppose also to, regardless of how you feeling like you're on a mission or what have you, which I'm guessing this person does, to do a shot of that length with nerves, strikes me as somebody that would be relatively experienced, but again, lots of people could, I mean, this is not, you don't have to be an assassin. You don't have to be a sniper, et cetera.
you don't have to be John Wick. You don't have to be John Wick, I think, is kind of the, the weird way to say that.
So, and again, I think that, the concern is that we have so many political and political adjacent targets that are relatively soft targets, and that is frightening. Thinking about, I spend a lot of time, as do you, on college campuses, and I was thinking about this. There's no way to guard against something like this. I mean, like the Trump assassination attempt. I mean, that's a mess up. Like to not clear every roof within 3/4 of a mile at a presidential candidate's thing is a giant mistake. I mean, that's a giant oversight. But we don't have the resources to protect everybody who is political and politically adjacent, in public. And, I think back to like Gabby Giffords, who, I mean, this has been quite a while ago now, but, she was, I think, at a grocery store doing like a kind of meet and greet, and I actually went a couple of years ago to DC. There's a organization, former members of Congress, that does they do the Congress to Campus program where retired Congress people come out and speak. And I was at one of their events, and they were all, they're all retired, but, they were saying, look, we have very little security and our families have very little security. And so, And again, I don't know that we have the resources to, I mean, you can't have, 5 Secret Service agents on every member of Congress or whatnot, but I'm very concerned about where this is going. And, I will say, I am so far as to say angry about some of the rhetoric, and certainly, there were absolutely things that were said on the left that were inappropriate. But all of this, I mean, with Civil War being a trending topic on Twitter, and Nancy Mace screaming about transgender people yesterday, and clearly they're behind it, and sort of this rush to use this, to blot out the left, and this war rhetoric, etc. What you need in a moment like this is to dial it down. And I'm not sure that, rhetoric is enough. I mean, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's going to be real hard to put back in. But, statements from Trump, statements from people in Trump world, statements from various members of Congress, I will say Spencer Cox was really good, governor of Utah. I don't have his statement directly in front of me, but it was very much about, a broad condemnation of political violence. We need to ratchet this down, et cetera. And, when you have people that are pushing that, this is an attack on us, this is a war, they're demons, et cetera, that is exactly what you don't need in this moment. And kind of this broader tarring of the left, not defined particularly well. I mean, somebody, I can't remember who now, but, we're going to go to George Soros, who funds these things. It's like, look, you don't need funding. George Soros didn't pay anybody to kill Charlie Kirk, for gosh sakes. But that kind of inflammatory rhetoric is exactly what we don't need. And the immediate jump to conclusions, it does stand to reason when somebody who is politically outspoken is killed that you have to figure, it is a reasonable supposition that had something to do with it. But there are, to immediately jump to Civil War, because obviously this was someone on the left and whatnot, is really a problem. I mean, right now we know the guy's names, we know a little bit about his family. We don't know much about his politics. My gut feeling, if I were to throw down the marker, is that they are probably borderline incoherent, as a lot of people are. I talked about this when we talked about the Trump assassination. I mean, that kid was kind of a mess. If you look at Luigi Mangione, there were people on the right who, wanted to make a hero out of him, until they started seeing like what else he'd been reading. And, he was not he was not the leftist vanguard that they were hoping for to lead the revolution. So who knows? We don't know what this person's going to be, but he's, to jump to the conclusion, that quickly. We even have, famous presidential assassinations, for gosh sakes. I mean, Ronald Reagan was shot over Jodie Foster. So just because a political figure is assassinated, we can't immediately assume that it's, we can't immediately assume motives. And again, this is, Friday afternoon and we're very early in the game, but, we still don't know, is this somebody who kind of went left in spite of his parents and is mad at Charlie Kirk that way? There's inner right fighting. Is this somebody that's mad at Charlie Kirk from the right? Is this some kind of, attempt to inflame a civil war from the right?
Or as you well pointed out, it could be incoherent, and that is often it is a not liked possibility, but it's frequently. I mean, one of the small facts we do know about him is that he only went to 1 year of college. I mean, we don't know if he left because he left. We don't know if he left because he was, got thrown out for some reason, right? Or he couldn't cut it, which also could have affected the way he thought about these things. And so,
sure,
there's all of these, like you point out, it's Friday the 12th, right? The idea that we have. And I think that is the larger problem here, is that the strongest voices at the moment And again, there's always going to be fringe voices, especially in a social media, who say fringe things.
Well, and I've said that when I talk about social media, in the past, is we've always had people that had crazy ideas.
Right.
But they couldn't find each other for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an innovation when they could Xerox form letters to each other, and things. But, we've always had, there's always the kooky guy that had some strange thoughts, and mostly he wouldn't bother anybody. But I'm sorry I interrupted. But
no, it's a good point.
Interrupted to agree with you. So,
but the thing from an analysis point of view is if you compare the statements from those in the Trump administration and from Trump, I think that's what's worrying. And my hope would be if that slowly comes down, I think we're in a better position. But if this becomes if the martyring and war, especially the war language and the demon language becomes even more institutionalized, I think this will end up being an unfortunate turning point in American history for the relationship between the political parties, and potentially for the way one party will finish out its governing term. And that is not something I want to be saying about in the United States. And yet here we are, I think, having to have that thought. And I think the real response, several people have asked me both on our Discord group and else, what do you, how do you deal with this? And I don't really know how to respond other than to bring it to kind of a moral point. And so I'm just gonna be honest, this comes from my Christianity. And that's to say that at base, we need to have radical empathy for the people that we are disagreeing with in these moments. And if we come from a position of radical Jesus empathy, if we come from that position, or even if you're not going to come with me on that train from a Christian point of view, but if you can come for me on that, if we can just kind of accept as a public democracy, we need to have a level of empathy for those others. It will help bring those kinds of temperature moments down, right? The idea that no, just because you're on the left doesn't mean you're part of shooting, and likewise, right? And I think that's precisely what we need, and that's what I've told several students who were pretty like, look, calm down. We need to have some radical empathy here,
right? And as coming from the atheist perspective, I have nothing to disagree with you there, at all.
Because it doesn't have to it doesn't have to come from a point of, it can come from other points. Yeah, absolutely.
We were just I was talking about, John Locke in class yesterday. It's kind of his notion of rights is very religiously defined as, if you don't buy that, I mean, you can frame this in terms of human rights, that we have as people, inherent dignity, et cetera. So I think you can often get, and this dialogue right here is how, we can disagree about something pretty fundamental and we like each other, or at least I like you, and I assume the feelings be,
Yes. We've really enjoyed this time. Yeah.
I've really enjoyed my time with you. So I think why I like doing this, I mean, we are modeling for a small audience, I hope, a way to talk about politics in a way of disagreeing without being assholes, and I'm certainly working on some things, on campus with some people to do kind of some dialogue-y kinds of things and stuff, just well before this, but just the idea that we need to be able to, and I would say dialogue, not debate, I think is, part of that, as well. I mean, it needs to be, and I think that part of the difference is that empathy, that you're talking about. I think that's a really frustrating, the number of people that have, been down on empathy lately really concerns me, because I think that's
I agree.
I think a fundamental, but I think, coming at this, from my non-religious perspective, I mean, there is this idea of, we need a certain sort of civil society set of conditions to exist to do democracy in a meaningful way.
Absolutely.
And we are supposed to go, as I always tell my students, I mean, day one of class, we are going to disagree with each other on things. I try to mostly keep them guessing, as far as what I'm about, but we have politics because we disagree. And part of why we have a political system, and this, this goes back to Plato and Aristotle, is that we have to find a way to live together in productive ways that promote human flourishing. And, that is essentially what a political process is for. And when you turn to violence, regardless of the direction, regardless of who's doing it and for what purposes, that really subverts the preconditions of civil society that we need to do democracy in a meaningful way. We are supposed to have a politics that sort of domesticates conflict, turns it into something where we're not doing this. I don't know how we come back from the brink. I mean, this country has gone through times of polarization before, pre-Civil War, late 1960s, et cetera. And there has seemed to be an ebb and flow about it, but I am not super optimistic right now. You get into this kind of tit for tat rhetoric, and I think people need to take a breath, step back, etc. One thing I wanted to circle back to a little bit that I think is going to be complicating here. I have a strong suspicion that nobody will ever be satisfied with the motive here, that we get to the bottom. And I think one of the difficulties, and this is where I start to feel old, but kind of what some internet subculture has turned into, this guy will have a digital footprint. And, we'll find it and it'll get combed through. But there are so many layers of irony and obfuscation and things that people do that I'm not sure that anything will ever give a definitive answer to what he was about. I mean, you can't, we're going to see stuff. And again, this is, Friday afternoon. We haven't seen any of it yet, so I'm not trying to spin, any particular thing. But I keep going back to the school shooter example and such. Is we see kind of these people with these online presences that just they don't make any sense in any traditional way. Some of it is that, hey, they're confused kids, and confused kids sometimes go down bad paths. But some of it is there is this performative nonsensishness about things. And, I don't know that we're ever going to get a super clear answer that satisfies anybody. And to tie that back to where we were, I do think that's going to provide a lack of closure that keeps potentially this going, because, he becomes sort of a Rorschach test for people as you look at whatever output he has, in the digital world, and everybody's going to find something to make him mad and blame somebody else.
Well, just to go back even.
Breathe deep. Imagine your legs more limber in Duluth Trading Double Flex Denim. Envision euphorically squatting for that can of suds, bending for your toolbox in a state of bliss, lunging for your laser level on a whole new level. Relax and allow the flex to fill you with ability. Find your inner flex in Double Flex Denim only at Duluth Trading.
Just go back a little bit further. I mean, think about the amount of the JFK assassination and the conspiracy that surrounds that as a result, even to this day. And today it's more complicated than that for what you point, because imagine had there been the digital footprint that all of these do your own research people had, going frame by frame. Who knows what
Lee Harvey Oswald,
did you know the ring chain, all of these, and before you know it, yes, your point is, I think, it's hard to overemphasize, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Given that I did go back, actually, I mean, not deep research, but, just, I went to Wikipedia, don't tell my students, but, I was looking over, presidential assassinations and assassination attempts, and, very few of them are things that make a lot of sense politically. And even JFK, I mean, and I am not a JFK conspiracy person, by any means, but we don't really have a clear picture of his motive, particularly, I mean, there's some inklings of things, but we don't really know. And I think, this is just magnified 100-fold, through kind of this digital era that we live in. So,
yeah. Well, I think I think we have, for what we have, I think that we've kind of exhausted those
I think we probably
options
have
at this moment. And but I am sure this will be something that we're talking on the Politics Guys for a while. I do want to at least get us to a couple other stories potentially. Had it not been for the killing of Kirk, I think that the first story, I think the biggest story this past week, unfortunately, is going to get a little bit buried, and I think that's the Noem versus Perdomo this week that came out, kind of what is sometimes called the shadow docket case. The Supreme Court paused a federal judge's ruling in Los Angeles that restricted federal agents' immigration steps, citing racial profiling. The U.S. District Judge in that case barred agents in Central District of Florida from making such stops without reasonable suspicion that the person was in the United States illegally. Now, reasonable suspicion here, the problem was it was being used by ICE agents solely on the basis of race, ethnicity, or speaking accented English, or being in like a particular gathering space, right? I.e. working particular kinds of jobs. Now, the Supreme Court's order holds the ruling pending. In other words, it will allow ICE to use those individually or in combination to make detentions while the case is pending. The actual decision itself is almost nothing. We do have Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence with the court, which is rather long. Which
it's also very strange to have a concurrence to a non-existent opinion, but
yes, it is, and that's an excellent point. This does not happen frequently, and it emphasizes the role of these kinds of orders, at least during the last year, and specifically in his case. He goes some unusual ways. He emphasizes a very narrow role for judges in immigration cases, and argues really that it's almost too easy for these individuals to demonstrate who they are and move forward, and that so fast moving forward, it's easy. Now, Sotomayor dissented from Monday's ruling, joined, of course, by, I shouldn't say of course, but joined by Kagan and Jackson. She called the court's action, quote, a grave misuse of our emergency docket, end quote, stating that that government should not seize anyone based solely or in just one or two connections with race, language, or employment status. Sotomayor concluded that the government's action actually violated the Fourth Amendment's ban on unreasonable searches and seizure. Now, as a matter of fact, there is a variety of, and I'm going to pop one up. We've got a variety of stories of individuals about what's going on. This Sotomayor in her dissent lists several, but not all. As a matter of fact, we have an individual just today. The Atlantic was running. He was in detention in what should have been a location that should have been there for no more than 12 hours for 14 days. Basically tortured and not actively. Let me rephrase that. He was neglected in huge ways, even though he was in fact had his paperwork at the moment of his arrest. And in that sense, I'll be honest, I'll say, Kavanaugh's explanation that the Trump administration is somehow meeting the critical factors that allow the court to have temporary relief in all honesty, it seems like a man who didn't like the fact that the court wasn't going to go out there and just kind of rule on it. And so he's kind of trying to give us a preview ruling is what I felt like here. But it is hard to overemphasize how big of a deal this is. I'll come at it even from a personal point of view. I have several students who said, I am carrying my passport now because I'm worried I'll disappear. And there are some communities where we've seen some people disappear, and we can't put this out of the context of the fact that the people doing this are masked and running around these areas. It's this bone chilling, I think, might be the phrase that I would use here. And it is deeply, I am deeply saddened that not one of the other justices joined with the dissenters in suggesting, even if, regardless of how one might rule, and that ultimately that this ought to be paused until there was the regular process of review, especially given what was in the actual facts of the case as you look through that. So, Justin, I mean, I don't think we're going to probably have too much disagreement here, but I am curious about your particular take.
No, I think this is a bad ruling, on both process and substance. I mean, I'm tremendously bothered by both of these. On the process side, I mean, the amount of stuff that is just shadow docket now is just absurd. And we are not getting the court's rulings. These are things that are tremendously consequential decisions with no justification, no explanation, a vote, and that's it. And, I think from a process level, that is problematic, to say the least. We have, the Supreme Court is weird in that, they don't transact their business publicly like Congress does, but they do. The transparency that we have is that they hear arguments and write justifications for their decisions in their opinions. And to not have any of that, I think, is just this giant abdication of traditional roles. The substance, I think, is worse. I am a fairly hardcore civil libertarian on these sorts of things. This is the way that Kavanaugh writes about this is just infuriating.
Yes.
So,
yes.
The quote that he's got here, that I think just completely misses the point. The interest of individuals who are illegally in the country in avoiding being stopped by law enforcement for questioning is ultimately an interest in evading the law. This is not an especially weighty legal interest. And the rejoinder that I have to that goes beyond the decorum of our podcast here, maintaining our family friendly rating. But everybody here is presumptively guilty. Is the framing of this?
Well, and take it one step further. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I did that to you.
But you're guilty on the basis of the fact that you might not speak English the way I want you to, and or you happen to be at a Home Depot, and or you happen to not be my particular pasty white color.
Right. Exactly. But the very logic of this just spits in the face of the Fourth Amendment. We have a certain presumption against unreasonable searches and seizures, admittedly undefined in the Constitution. But for a long time, we have a tradition that things like race are not adequate to stop people and interfere with them. And I agree that the country has an interest in enforcing immigration law. I'm a moderate on this, to an extent. I mean, we have immigration law. You can have a border. You can enforce that, et cetera. But there are really important procedural things that I am not willing to walk away from, in this really any circumstance, but this circumstance in particular. The framing here, again, it's this assumption of guilt. Part of why we have this illegal search and seizure prohibition is to not bother people that aren't guilty, and we are presumptively, as you said, we're presumptively, anybody with an accent, anybody named Martinez, whatever, is open season to be pestered, and more so, and I think that's the really scary part. Back when I was young and scary looking, I got, every time I flew, I got the random, extra scrutiny, which was infuriating. I mean, fly with a nose ring and a mohawk, and they're going to randomly stop you for extra screening every time. And this was pre 9/11. And that's not, did it make me mad? Yeah, that's nothing compared to, hey, we're going to cart you off to some center, and maybe you'll end up in El Salvador.
Well, or in some cases, I mean, again, one we just see today that had just come out, 13 days detained in a location where it's illegal to be detained, 26 days until he's allowed to remove. Now with with an actual like bracelet on. Again, even though he is here legally in the country with his surgeon wife, right, who holds a job. It is hard. It's sometimes you want to be careful to not overstate things. But in this case, it's hard to overstate how ridiculous that sentence is.
The entire point of due process, which, has really taken a beating from this administration, both rhetorically and in practice, the whole point of due process is to filter out the guilty from the not guilty, and the presumption here is that, ICE can just pick up anybody that they have any suspicion of and just do what they want with them, and there's really no recourse, and that's just terrifying. I mean, it's just a perversion of the Fourth Amendment. I would add, going back where we've had other discussions of racial profiling, this was probably 15 years ago now. The city of New York got sued over stop and frisk searches, and it did not make it to the Supreme Court because ultimately this was kind of a policy from Giuliani, and I'm drawing a blank, but the next mayor, was it Bloomberg, I think.
I think that's the correct order, yes.
I think whoever the next mayor was chose not to appeal, but they lost at the federal district court. But one of the things that was really striking in the stop and frisk data was how bad police were at determining probable cause. For kind of this lower level search. They were disproportionately stopping African-American and Latino men. And the hit rate for everybody was abysmal. The people that they were suspicious of, they weren't finding much of anything. And the stuff that they were finding was like, 2 joints and things like that. You're not finding somebody that's got a giant rifle in their pocket or something. It's these low-level offenses, but they were particularly bad sorting out minorities. The hit rate for white people, where a search led to an arrest for something, was substantially higher. And again, this is the kind of reason that we shouldn't be using these kind of criteria to stop people. Now, admittedly, there is a certain probabilistic element here that, the likelihood that a white guy that speaks English and just happens to be at Home Depot buying a hammer is here illegally is probably lower, is lower. But you can't leave the probability here of hassling people or worse that aren't doing anything. Again, we have a pretty good track record here of law enforcement not being great at using these criteria to do things. And
this isn't law enforcement in the traditional sense. And so
God only knows who these people are, to be honest. I mean,
right. Because again, in this case, I know what you're talking about there. And I would suggest that the likelihood is it's much lower in terms of actually having actual hits, because these aren't police officers who are even theoretically trained to deal with this kind of issue.
Yeah, and so again, I think this Kavanaugh line is just infuriating to me. Just because it's not the interest of people that are here illegally in avoiding being stopped. It's everybody in avoiding being stopped. Like, nobody wants to be stopped. That's not to say that we don't have to stop people sometimes. I mean, I'm not taking this position that, we shouldn't have police or, anything like that.
Yes, I hear that.
But for gosh sakes, like, nobody likes having interactions with police for the most part. I mean, I got pulled over and got let off with a warning, last year for having a headlight out, and it was really uncomfortable, and that's like middle-aged white guy, no concern about where I'm headed, I'm going to get a $150 ticket is the worst outcome, at this for me. But nobody wants to be hassled. I guess, to be fair, he had probable cause. I had a headlight out. But, it is a burden here interacting, and to ignore the number of people who are potentially being stopped, who we know are being stopped, that didn't do anything, and then being processed in ways that don't cope with that very well. It boggles my mind. I'm just extra salty today, but I'm not
That's
not my normal jovial self. But this is just BS. I mean, it's just, and again, this comes back to some of this language stuff. I mean, we are pitching all of this, Trump is pitching this, it's an invasion and blah, blah, blah. And, that seems to be sort of a rhetorical justification that has found some traction, here
it's found a lot of traction. I mean, I think that's one of the things I had told, I had looked at a bunch of research on this. Ken and I earlier on in this looked at this very deeply. And I think it is easy, the anti-immigration position. I don't mean that in a sense because again, you were talking a bit, you're more middle of the road on immigration. I would actually probably outflank you in weird ways on immigration. I'd be more open, but let's save that, let's just save that for a minute.
Oh, could I clarify? Do your thing, and I'll come back and clarify my position. But
yeah. But be that as it may, it is a hugely popular position comparatively, and I think that is precisely why this is able to be happening, because it is a popular position. But that is precisely what the court, if the court can't be the anti-popular position for liberty, then there is no, and for due process and for procedural rights, there is no reason for the court. The court's American purpose, it's stemming back to the United Kingdom, is specifically to make sure that when there is something popular, that we cannot just enforce it in ways that are efficient but liberty reducing, or individual due process reducing, or court reducing. And the fact that we have that happen, that's why we're salty, right? Because that is a subversion of its whole intent. And if it can't do that, then why have it? We might as well just vote to get rid of everybody, and go, well, I'm sorry. You want due process?
49%.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. I mean, we, as I emphasize in class, when we do civil liberties, this is not to protect the popular stuff, because that doesn't need protection, and people, and especially the 4th through 8th Amendments. I mean, people all the time, and not just immigration, it's criminal stuff, as well. It's like, well, gosh, these are bad people. Why should they have their rights protected? And it's, well, we need a process to sort people out who are and are not guilty of things. And, even with that, even the people that are guilty, there is still a notion of some level of humanity there, so.
I mean, they are still owed. This is hard for students sometimes to suggest your procedural rights are not just because you might be innocent, but as a human being, you are deserving of certain rights regardless of what you have done. And though we may punish you because you violated social contract and legal principles, that doesn't mean we can do. Yeah, we can't do anything we want to you, right? I can't cut the guy's finger off. Why? Because that would be too far. And even though he is in fact guilty,
this is what separates us from the state of nature.
Exactly. And if otherwise, we might as well be in the state of nature. And well, as a matter of fact, you might not know this, Justin. My middle son, all of my children are named different ways to have connections. My middle son, his middle name is in fact Locke. So it shouldn't be a shock here, friend.
Oh, you're speaking my language. Holy cow.
So that is in fact now, but I do notice, Justin, last thoughts on this, because then we do need to finish up.
Yeah, just to clarify, my immigration position. I think borders and illegality are real issues. If I were going to kind of set my own policy, I'd make it a lot easier to immigrate legally, is step one. And, the second part, just given, and I think this is the backdrop of this, the cost, both kind of monetarily and morally, of doing really harsh removal policy is not worth it, ultimately. So I would be all for, and I knew this is not what we're going to get, but Trump campaigns on, we're just going to deport the bad ones and, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. I have no problem, deporting people that are criminals and guilty of things, et cetera. That was never going to be what this was. And it's not what this is. And, trying to deport, somebody's abuela that's been here for 30 years and not causing any trouble. Hey, even if she came here illegally, that's not worth the moral or monetary cost of getting rid of that person. And so I'm not sure that maybe we're that, far apart ultimately, but
maybe we're closer. I might be even slightly to the left of that, but
I think, in enforcing the law is not the end of the world. I think actually, hell, more immigration would be better than less. And I think there is value in providing a legal framework, et cetera, but we also make it ridiculously hard to become a citizen. And for gosh sakes, like, there are lots of ways that we could manage this, and none of that justifies any of this. Just to be clear. So.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause. At least maybe that's the best upbeat note we've had for this episode. Maybe it's a good place to end on an upbeat note. As a matter of fact, Justin, we did not get to everything we were going to do, so we've got a packed midweek show that's going to be coming up. We're going to be recording in just a minute. And so if you want to be a part of that, you need to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. It's a whole lot of fun. I've also mentioned on the show, we're talking about people on Discord. I've been interacting with them. That's another benefit of becoming a supporter. So if you would like to be a supporter, it just takes a minute. You can head to the show notes, click right there to become a supporter, or you can do it old school. Head to politicsguys.com/support and get us that way as well. And you'll get also ad-free versions of the show and other things. You can also, if you just like to contact us, you can always reach us on email, where we're mail@politicsguys.com. And we always ask you to subscribe, rate, and review. Those algorithms are so important, including sharing episodes like today's episode. I would say especially today's episode, bring the temperature down. And as always, though, I want to have wonderful shout outs to the executive producers of the Politics Guys, who are Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll be back with a new full episode this next week. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,